pretty straightforward. It's very ordered. He has a structure. So what we're going to do is explore some of the ideas behind humility and this idea of a structured, ordered world. And I had posted kind of a conversation starter. Let me see if I can open the chat. Excuse me. So I'm going to be drinking a lot because my allergies are acting up. And so I've got a little bit of a sore throat. So back to my familiar ground is the Ramchal's book, Derek Hashem, talking about the idea of divine providence, or hashgacha, which is supervision of the world. And so if you've been able to, join in the few of the rooms we've done, the last one I tried to explain is this idea that there has to be an interface between us and God. We are physicality, we're physical, limited, finite beings trying to relate to an infinite God. And so the very idea of being is diametrically opposed in existence. So there has to be some kind of an interface for us to interact with God, for God to interact with his creation, and for creation to reach back and interact with God. And the structure for this mechanism, this interface, is called Gevura, or some say judgment, some say strength, these type of ideas. So the interface that most people are familiar with when you get into these ideas of Hod is this idea of divine providence. So when Bnei Israel leave Mitzrayim, they leave Egypt, and they get to Har Sinai, to the Mount Sinai. They fail, they fall, they make the golden calf, and now instead of having this direct access, this direct interface with God, what happens instead is there's a buffer between Israel and Hashem, and that is in the form of the Mishkan, or the tabernacle, and the priests, the Kohanim, and the Leviim. So instead of the firstborn of every family and household having an opportunity to directly connect to Hashem in the role of a Kohen, now you have a specific place, specific time, specific person that you're going to interface with God. And so very readily there's the Aharon and Aaron and Moses kind of stand in for this example of what an interface looks like, as Moshe is constantly intervening and interceding on behalf of Israel so they don't get destroyed. And you have the other aspect of that there, Tehumah, the impurity, and their holiness being the intervention there from Aaron and ultimately his children. So this is from chapter 2, section 2, chapter 8. And I'm going to read a little bit. So it says, all the things that we must realize that the entire procedure of God's providence, which is the supervision, that involves a fairest rule of justice. So we're going to Hod, we're going to the left side, that's justice, that's Gevura. The psalmist said that God said to God, the scepter of your kingdom is a scepter of fairness. It is likewise written in Mishlei, the king sustains the land with justice. We know, however, that God's desire is only to do good and loves his handiwork as a father loves his children. As a result of this very love, however, a father might often find it necessary to discipline his children for their ultimate good. The same is true of God, as the Torah states in Deuteronomy, as a father disciplines his child, so God disciplines you. God's law and judgment therefore also originate in his love. His punishment is not hateful vengeance, but the discipline of a loving father who only desires good for his children. This principle has two corollaries. First, the punishment itself is alleviated. God's love tempers his judgment with mercy, and the punishment is therefore not harsh and cruel. Secondly, when necessary, God can sometimes suspend the rule of justice completely and operate with mercy alone. This is something of which he told Moshe and Shemot, I will have mercy upon whom I have mercy, and I will show compassion upon whom I show compassion. And let's see if I can get to the next photo, which is 671. And let me move this here. Yes, okay. So God willed, however, that man should have free will to do as he desires, and that man's deeds should be recompensed on the basis of a fair system of judgment and reward. To the extent that we can express this, we must say that God subjugated his providence to man's actions, subjecting man to do good or evil, only as his deeds warrant. The truth, however, is that God is not subjugated to any rule whatsoever. He has no need for anything else, nor is he affected by anything. When God desires to impose his superiority, he can therefore act and direct things as he wills with absolutely no hindrance. There is absolutely nothing that he can do. He must necessarily do. The fact that God directs the world with strict justice is therefore merely the result of his own self-imposed subjugation to his system.
Alicia, you're still on page 1.
What?
You're still showing page 1.
Oh, you don't see page 171?
I see the first page only that you were on.
Let me try sharing this one and go back. I will reread this, and I'm so sorry if I didn't hear you. Here we go. Let's see. And that's like the whole page, this next page is the entire point. So I'm going to get back to share screen. Page 171. Okay. Can you see this? No, I'll reread this. Can you see 171? I can't see the chat here. Okay, good. Okay, so God willed, however, that man should have free will to act as he desires, and that man's deeds should be recompensed on the basis of a fair system of judgment and reward. To the extent that we can express this, we must say that God subjugated his providence to man's actions, subjugating man to good or evil only as his deeds warrant. The truth, however, is that God is not subjugated to any rule whatsoever. He has no need for anything else, nor is he affected by anything. When God desires to impose his superiority, he can therefore act and direct things as he wills with absolutely no hindrance. There's absolutely nothing that he must necessarily do. The fact that God directs the world with strict justice is therefore merely the result of his own self-imposed subjugation to his system. When his wisdom decrees it best to override this rule of law, on the other hand, he can impose a superiority. Sorry, I got a window in front of me. He can impose a superiority and sole authority and suspend this rule. In this manner, he can overlook any sin or rectify any wrong with his omnipotent power. Two types of providence therefore exist. There is the providence of God's justice, but there is an overriding providence based on his sole authority. God thus directs all creation in two ways. One involves strict justice, which usually weighs and judges every deed. There is also an overriding providence, however, through which God sustains all creation through his power and omnipotence, not allowing it to be destroyed by evil afflictions of mankind. So the question I asked in the forum was, does God need us? And people rightly pointed out some very important ideas. One, what does it mean to need? Define need. And obviously the answer to that in God's essence is God does not need anything. That would imply that God would be deficient and therefore is lacking. And the other really important aspect of this is what does need mean there? What is the definition? Is it, if you go a philosophical and Kabbalistic idea, the word need really could be substituted as desire. And this is interesting when you look at the idea of, does God desire us? Well, the obvious answer there is yes, because you exist, I exist, and creation exists. Therefore, God had a desire for us to come into this world. Now, the question is, and I've said this many times, and I've never backed it up, and it's a question that bothers me. And I realized I was saying that, every individual, every person is created with intent, with a purpose, with a function, and is necessary and important by the mere fact of their existence. Now, there's a few things that the wrong call brings up that are really important that we kind of talked on, addressed in some of the responses in the question, does God need us? The big one is that by creating a world of deficiency, of lacking, of needing something or a rectification, God is not affected by creation or his creating anything into existence, because creation is outside of God's true essence and true existence. So therefore, Everything that is created doesn't affect God at all. God doesn't change, didn't change before or after. The other part is when you look at creation, what is creation supposed to be? We know that there's a ratzon, there's a will that creation come into existence. We see it because we have evidence because we're here. But the big question is, what is it truly? And, you know, the simple answer is it's a reflection of, and then this is where we're going to get into some of these ideas, is there's a rabbi I listen to very frequently, and he says, when you look at a painting, you take a famous painting, when you look at the painting hanging on the wall and you don't know anything about the artist, let's say you don't know who painted it or anything about that, how much can you really discern about the individual that created that painting based on the painting alone? Can you tell if they're a male or female? Can you tell? You can tell very little. When you look at a painting, it's revealing a very small aspect of that individual and who they are and their lived experiences and their thoughts and their dreams and their desires and everything. You do have a connection because they take in a specific point in time, choose to reveal a specific aspect of themselves, but it's a very limited way. So creation is this idea that there are revealed aspects of God that we can connect to, we can see. We understand what good is, we understand what evil is, and we understand reward and punishment. These kind of concepts are things that we can connect to. But ultimately, when you look at creation, it's just a very minute fraction of revelation of God's true etzem, his true essence. And therefore, even if you take and you study a subject at depth that everything has been revealed, you're never going to ever get close to the true essence of God. The other part of that is that can sound very disheartening, like how can you truly know God? But we see that there's a very important aspect of the Ram Call brings into this, and that is that we are desired, we're here for a purpose and a reason. And the really important thing is in this system, God kind of changed himself and is beholden to this system as well. So when you get into this idea, does God need us? But the very fact of how this structure and creation was made, God created deficiency within the system, created a purpose and a design, and therefore we truly are needed because we're the whole purpose of the system. And because God allows himself to be a part of the system, therefore we have an ability to know God in a very deep and profound way. Even though God is infinite and his true etzem, his true essence is unknowable to us, because God has invested himself in the system and revealed aspects of himself in the system, then we have an opportunity to know God in a very deep way. So the next thing I want to share and go through, and again, please get on the mic. I may not always be able to see questions, or you can type a question in and maybe Tovi or someone else can pop in and speak. So anyway, I know I'm jumping around a lot. Like I said, this is kind of an impromptu thing, and these are different ideas and different things that God willing, will be able to pull together in a little bit more meaningful way. Oh, here we go. Okay, share screen with the next section. And this is, I was actually talking to somebody about this book. This is a book called Song of the Soul, Yedid Nefesh. And it's a book, kind of an introduction to Kabbalistic ideas by Rabbi Yerachmiel Bar-Lev. And a lot of it is based upon the commentary of the Ramchal on the writings of the Arizal. Let me get the chat here. And it's actually available on Amazon for Kindle for like $4.99. It's a very, very interesting book. So one of the things that when you see there's a creation, you exist, I exist, creation is here, we can talk about it. So creation, the painting of the artist, going back to the analogy of the artist, the painting of the artist is evidence that they have a will, they have a desire to create something. We have the evidence because we're looking at the final product. And so going into this idea and exploring it a little bit further is the idea of ratzon. In Hebrew, it means a very specific thing. It means will. Like, you know, if you, but we're going to explore the broad Kabbalistic understanding. What happened just here? Oh, I just clicked things. Okay, so this is the very opening section of the Song of the Soul. It says the significance of the term Ratzon in Kabbalah is far broader than the concept. I'm gonna have to close the chat window. Of will, which we are familiar. Let us consider the following example. A man purchases a house, which is in the final stages of construction. Its present stage was preceded by other stages. There was a planning stage, and before that, the stage of thinking about building, i.e. determining the different purposes of building. Should the building serve as a dwelling or something else? In fact, even prior to planning, there was a previous stage, the desire to build. Thus, the order of the steps involved in constructing the house is desire. The gathering of the information on the various options as to what the building can be used for, and implementation. Implementation is the stage which acts as a transition from the theoretical to the actual. During the stage of desire and thought, the house exists only in potential, while during the stage of implementation, the building becomes reality. And you can see, if you understand, are familiar with the concepts of the four worlds of existence, you can see that this kind of follows that idea as well. If we look around us, we will find that all of reality went through this process. Whether a dwelling or a factory was built, a road paved, or a simple action performed, there was an order, a transition through the following stages: the desire to act, and let's see if I can, there we go. Okay, the desire to act, thought, including the details of the action and its goals. Can you see this page? Is it moving forward? Okay. And bringing the plan to fruition, an example, implementation. So this is the idea of when you look at an artist, he desires to paint something, he plans on what he's going to paint, he gathers the material, the canvas, the paints, the brushes, everything he'll need or she will need to create the painting, and then actually creates the painting. So if a man performs an action, does it indicate anything about his capability? If an engineer builds a small, narrow bridge, would it be correct to conclude that from this he is incapable of constructing a larger or wider bridge? Obviously, we cannot draw such a conclusion. It is possible that this instance required a small, narrow bridge. But if a long, wide bridge were required, he might have been able to construct it without difficulty. In other words, we cannot deduce anything about the ability from the fact that he built a narrow bridge. All we can deduce is that it is what his desire was. We can determine that he wanted to construct this particular type of bridge and not something else. Since desire or will, ratzon, implies a wish to achieve a certain goal, the goal places limitations on the desire. In the example above, the engineer wanted to build a small, narrow bridge, and since that goal guided him, it limited him to such a bridge and no other, even though he could have built a wider and a larger one. In summary, from a person's actions, we can determine his will. From a person's actions, we cannot determine the extent of his options, and the goal which the engineer wishes to achieve through his actions limits his will in action. And this is the idea of Hod in the system of Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. You have from all of these possibilities, it's kind of a smaller projection of this higher idea of Chokmah, Bina, and Da'at. So Chokmah is, all of the possibilities that are here. Bina brings it down into one and expands on that idea. Like, you have the idea you want to paint. Well, I mean, you could paint a wall, you could paint the floor, you could paint a picture, you can do, it says so many, painting can mean so many things. Bina brings it down. Okay, we're going to paint a portrait of a person, and then you're actually fulfilling it. And this is a kind of a microcosm of that process at a lower level. Netzach, Hod, and Yesod. And so Hod is this limiting capacity of all the possible actions that you could take, of all the possible bridges, you're choosing this bridge. And so in regards to Ratzon is this idea of a surrounding energy. It's immense. Your will to do things can be almost unlimited until you actually bring it down into a specific choice and then fulfill it, follow through with the action. It's the surrounding nebulous energy that can almost be, in a sense, infinite in possibilities that you can do. And so when it comes to this idea of does God need us? Well, we'll instead of the word need, and God desires us. We know that God desires us. All the possible worlds of all the possible creations, we can't even understand, we don't know what God could have made and may have made in the past, but we know what God made here because we are experiencing it. We see the results of God's will, his desire, his ratzon lived out in our own personal existence and the existence of creation as well. And do we have any questions or comments at this point? Oh, my voice is.
The volume has had some times where it sounds like you're very clear, and then it sounds a little bit like you're
Is it doing? Oh, it's doing
a little further away, and it's side of a tin cup. It sounds tinny, further away sound. But
let me see if I can. If I can take a. I can take a quick break and see if I can put my AirPods in and see if that would help, because this was the problem I was having before.
Yeah, we can pause for a minute. If anybody needs to grab a drink or something, do that. We'll resume in just a minute.
Let me do that real quick. I'll mute myself as I try.
While she's doing that, yeah, I've been trying to post some things. Question for later. Yeah, those are a lower reflection of the three above, right? They descend one right from the other. So the Netzachot and Yesod are how those things are put into action.
Your kindness and your care.
Nope, that was her. We got some free concert footage. Where was I? So yeah, if you're on Aish Hator, calls Netzachot tactical Sephirot, that's how you actually use them in the world of action. Whereas Chesed, Gevurah, and Tiferet are a little bit more in the mind and planning stage, an organizational type of aspect to our being. And no one can't hear. I don't know if you can hear me now. She's adjusting. She's getting a different hookup for her audio here to see if it sounds better. I'm trying some different things here. That's happened before. It faded out. So while I'm thinking of it, next Thursday night, I have a room next Thursday night, first of the month. And then Thursday after that, I don't think we will have one. That would normally be her week, Elishevas, but she's going to be away. So we may have to improvise again that week. And then third and fourth Thursdays of the month, we have our meditation room on the third Thursday and the women's group on the fourth Thursday. I'll keep talking until she gets back on the mic. And you can probably hear my kitty Asher behind me. Okay, he's part of the team. So let's see here. Yeah, so how are you talking and meowing at the same time? Yeah, it's a trick. I can drink a glass of water or drink out of my water bowl at the same time too. It's amazing skill set I have. Yeah. Cool. All right. So Thursday nights, until further notice, at least through the summer, and when daylight savings and all that comes back, we may revert back to Saturday nights. But for now, Thursday nights, we plan, Lord willing, to have something going on every night. The only night with any restriction is the women's group, which is only half of you can attend. And for information on that, just contact Elia here. So you can ask her. Oh, hold on. I'm going to get off the mic so they can see.
No, I don't think I can't hear you.
I can hear you.
I'm trying to figure out if it's where the sound's not coming through.
Sounds really good right now.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what is my speaker, like my microphone. Let's see. I think I'm going to mute myself.
That sounded very, very clear. So whatever you're doing, keep doing that when you come back. We are recording this, by the way, in case anybody has any friends who couldn't attend. did remember to click the record button right as she was starting. So Lord willing, we'll get this back on in a minute. We were reading out of a text earlier called Derech Hashem by Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto from a couple hundred years ago, actually. It's the way of God. It's the best text you can find for a nicely outlined, organized fundamentals of Torah, from the basic stuff into the details. It's a Torah classic, and you want everything organized in one book. Derech Hashem is the book to learn the fundamentals of Torah. So that's a great book. You can buy it on Amazon. You can buy it on Feldheim. You can buy it at a bunch of places. So, yeah, it's kind of a must-have. It's in the top 3. You know, you got your scriptures, and then you got Derech Hashem, and then you got maybe 1 or 2 others. Yeah, and then some more. But that's my opinion. It's definitely up there. Song of the Soul. I don't know. That might be it. Is it by Rachmiel Bar-Lev? Because that's the one. It's because sometimes books have the same title. Oh,
It is that one. Yeah,
it is that one.
clicked
Okay.
it.
I think you were flashing a title of the cover there for a minute. Are you coming back?
I think, yeah, I just made sure that it's actually going. That cat is so loud. It actually is coming through to the microphone. Okay, so this solves a problem for now. Sorry. So going into this idea of, the word need was a little clickbaity. It's actually desire. But if you look within the system that we exist in, within creation and within this world, we are actually needed. We're not just desired. And that is because this world was created with a deficiency that only mankind can address. And therefore, when you look within the system of creation itself, then you have the word need. When you look outside of the system and in general, then it is desire. And as the Ramchal said, even though there's a deficiency within our system of creation that mankind is here to address, God can suspend that at any time. And so in the higher realm, you have Chesed and Gevurah, you have judgment, and you have loving kindness. So so the solution isn't one or the other. And I think I have it marked somewhere. I have like 6 books in front of me, so I don't know if I marked it or not. If not, I'll address it and I'll find the source, God willing, and post it after. So going a little bit about 2 aspects of Ratzon. So he talks a little bit about Ratzon, can be revealed in a very limited way, and that you can lower who you are as a person in a very limited way and share just a tiny little aspect of yourself. So we've discussed 2 aspects of Ratzon, what the engineer could have desired and what he actually desired. The first aspect is the maximum, which the engineer could have attained with his total ability. Let's see if it's going to go forward. Whoops, okay. And the ability which he actually uses, and what he did and didn't. Okay, I'm reading here. What he did and not what he could have done. So you have what he could, with the potential that the engineer could have done versus what he actually did. So until now, we've discussed human Ratzon and human creativity. Let us continue by considering divine will and divine creativity. The world in which we live, created in 6 days, also passed through stages mentioned earlier, and it's we'll get into that, God willing, in a future date. Which is we'll explain. Okay, so so pass through the stages mentioned earlier. Later on, we will explain the Creator established this model, Ratzon, planning and action, thereby providing the background for human action in accordance with the same model. First came Ratzon, the divine will to create the world. Ratzon, like thought, is something hidden, known only to its owner. Man's Ratzon is his character, his essence. Man's Ratzon is his character, his essence, is able to reveal so that others may know and even share it. When we build the house, our Ratzon is revealed. The Ratzon emerges from the hidden to the revealed, from potential to actual. As for the creator's Ratzon, with the creation of the world, it was revealed that the creator had Ratzon to create it. From divine creation, we cannot draw any conclusions about the extent of God's ability. On the contrary, because we believe that the creator's ability and his Ratzon are infinite, nothing prevents him from creating another, more perfect world. Only because the creator is limited his Ratzon in relation to a specific goal that he set for himself, did he create the world as it is. Like the Ramchal says, he limits himself. He kind of puts limitations on his infinite aspects by creating our world, and kind of beholds himself to express himself in a finite way. Thus, God limited his Ratzon and fashioned the world not according to his power, but with one self-imposed limited ability. And that harkens back to what we're reading, is that if I can go back to that and just reread it with this explanation that it gave, it makes a lot more sense in light of this. And let me see, new share and page 171. We'll share that again. He says here, the fact that God directs the world with strict justice, therefore merely the result of his own self-imposed subjugation to his system. So God has infinite aspects. It's like in some of the classes before, talking about, Moshe wanting to understand, like, the why, and in regards to Rabbi Akiva, who Lag BaOmer is about, why is the reward of such a Zadik such a horrible death? Like, why does he end in such a horrible way? And that's the part that Moshe couldn't understand, because there's an infinite aspect to how God orders and structures the world that transcends our understanding. And we as finite beings don't have the capacity to understand and to know all of these aspects. It would literally destroy us. Okay. So going back to the book here, and so we're going to go into one other set as okay, so thus there are two aspects of God's will: infinite divine Ratzon and limited divine Ratzon. Kabbalah calls the first simple will, or Ein Sof, which is infinite, and the second Sefirot, or emanations. The creator created the finite world. The subject of the Sefirot is fundamental to the teachings of Kabbalah, and later we shall devote a separate chapter to the subject, and there's lots of books obviously on that. But at this stage, let us merely state that the Sefirot are segments of a limited Ratzon. The meaning of this is that the creation of the world is a revelation of divine Ratzon to create the world. The creator desired to create an imperfect world so that man, who has free will, can, through his service of the creator, complete that which is lacking. Were God to have created the world with his full omnipotence, it would have been a perfect universe, and there would have been no possibility of man serving his creator by perfecting the world. One other way that the Ramchal describes this is there would be no orientation. If everything's perfectly symmetrical, and there's really no beginning, there's no end, because there's no point of reference. Okay. Let's see. The creator desired to create an imperfect world so that man who has free will can, through his service of the creator, complete that which is lacking. Where God chooses create. Yeah, okay. This is the reason that God created an imperfect world and revealed only part of his ability and his limited Ratzon. In addition, the creator wished to reveal his limited Ratzon in stages, revealed only part. That's right. In addition, the creator wished to reveal his limited Ratzon in stages in revelation after revelation. The Sefirot are forces through which the creator has fashioned all worlds. They are therefore the vehicles of the revelation of his will. Thus, the 10 Sefirot are segments of God's limited Ratzon through which he has created a limited and imperfect universe. And this is one of the answers that in the discussion questions, is that in this world of deficiency, in this world of imperfection, God made man a necessary aspect of this world. That there is a function that in general only mankind can fulfill, and individually every person has a role and a function within creation as well. Rabbi, I'm not going to do it justice, but one of the stories is that Rabbi Simon Jacobson was on his book tour, and this woman who was very successful came to him, and outwardly just immensely successful. She was PhDs and an MD, and she had a successful practice, and she was, she had her children and friends, and outwardly she seemed to be doing very, very well. But inwardly, she had this world that no one could see. And this is this idea that, what you see isn't necessarily what is, there's much more to an individual in a circumstance. And apparently she had gone through some severe trauma and abuse and overcame like really horrible, horrible abuse as a child. And she had this disconnect from God and from the people around her. She just felt like she was worthless. And she tried, being overachieving to try and get a sense of worth and a sense of purpose, and it never really fulfilled her. And she actually kind of talked to him about, at some point she was going to kill herself. She just didn't see any future. And his one word to her, and he's like, in the moment, like it's a book signing tour, and he didn't really anticipate meeting someone who's saying, in like 2 years I'm planning on ending my life. And he really didn't know what to say, and he stopped for a moment and he said, the mere fact of your existence means that you have a purpose. God put you in this world for a reason, and I know that's true because you and I are here today. And that's all he had time to say to her. And he always thought, and it came about several months that he ended up getting a letter from her. And this was a kind of a life-changing moment for both of them. And for her, she really going back to this very basic idea that the mere fact that we exist, that an individual exists, means that they have a purpose and they have a function. And Kabbalah is very clear that everything in the world is being constantly sustained every moment and every second, just like a television, like the old television pictures were. Every moment it's being refreshed. Every moment God is by will and desire and sustaining us and bringing us into existence at every moment. So the fact that you're here, the fact that we exist, means that you have a purpose and you're desired. And we know creation is desired because it exists. We know that the individual is desired because it exists. And when I heard people say this many years ago, I'm like, that's just like psychological, feel-good, mumbo-jumbo fluff. But it actually goes back to some very deep Kabbalistic concepts that predate psychological mumbo-jumbo fluff by several hundred years or 1,000 years. So going back to this idea of will and desire, let's see here. Everything. Okay. So so Ratzon is this very esoteric, hidden thing. It's there's a better word, but I can't think of it right now. And we only see the action, the koach, the action, the force of somebody's ultimately carrying out the will through these stages. We can't. Thank goodness, you can't read my mind, and I can't read your mind for now, and that's a good thing. And so you don't truly understand everything going behind what I'm thinking right now, even though I'm conveying ideas and I'm handing over these images and these concepts. You really don't like understand the process. You aren't really going inside my mind to understand this. And this another way that the idea of God's divine will and how we receive that will and how it's reflected back to us is the idea of a teacher and a student. So you have two things. You have the giver and the receiver, the teacher who is handing over concepts and ideas, and you have the recipient, the student. And they both have different capacities. One, is the student who's listening, is he young? Is he 5 or is he 25? So that makes a difference in how they're able to comprehend and understand material. What is their level of intelligence? What's the level of experience? And then you have the teacher. The teacher is what are the concepts and the knowledge that they're trying to hand over? What is their experience? What are their ability to to convey, to teach? How gifted are they? Do they have like the personality and the knowledge and the linguistic skills and all of these ideas to hand over these concepts? Even the most gifted student and the most gifted teacher, when they meet, is going to be very limited in how they can exchange ideas, unless you do like the Vulcan mind meld, to use a sci-fi analogy. You're really going to be very limited in how you hand over these ideas, how the teacher can convey concepts and ideas to the student. And ultimately, there's this limiting capacity. And this is the idea of Hod as well. It limits the information, and it relays it to this transmitter, which is Yesod, in a very limited capacity. And so even though the will of the teacher might be to teach, teach this 5-year-old, all the intricacies and beauty of quantum physics, their ability to receive is going to be very limited. And so even though you have a will to transmit and a will to hand over these ideas, it's dependent upon the recipient in the system. And that's where this idea of deficiency comes in. Not only does the system have deficiencies which need to be corrected, but the recipient has a deficiency as well. Their ability to comprehend and lived experiences, all of these things come into play. And so just because you have a will to do something and you have the capacity to do it doesn't mean that you have the ability to transmit it. And the person that is directed, the will is being directed towards, has the capacity to take that in. And this is where I am trying to find. This is where I have the 6 books in my preparation for tonight. It wasn't the best. And it's in one of 6 books I have in front of me talking about this idea of the ultimate receiver and transmitter as Malkuth. Excuse me. So talking about the recipient when it comes into Ratzon, and I think he might get into it here. So going into the recipient, the idea, one of the words for Malkuth, which is kingship or kingdom, is might be in this book here. Trying to just set my apologies for the silence here. I may have. I can't find the exact book. So the Red Brashab in one of his discourses talks about this idea of the recipient, the cup is, and I've used this analogy too, and I don't know where I get that. It's this idea of like you have molten lead and you desire, or gold. Let's say you want to hand gold over to somebody, you want to make them extremely wealthy, but it's only molten gold, and the recipient comes to you with a paper cup. Obviously, it's going to destroy the cup, and the recipient will be harmed by the way that you're going to transmit this information. So therefore, you can't really give that over. So in talking about divine will, you also have to think about the energy, the recipient, like in the system of the Sephirot. We have God's will to create in his various attributes, infinite attributes, but those infinite attributes we can't understand, we can't comprehend, and the system itself can't handle infinite amounts of energy. Just like a vessel will be destroyed if too much force of, if you pour like 1,000 gallons into a paper cup, it's going to ruin it, or the molten gold. So even within the system of the Sephirot, with you have Keter, Chokmah, Bina, Da'at, not so much Keter, I say Chokmah, Bina, Da'at, they are limited in their ability to receive from the transmitter as well. So you can say that within our system you have this deficiency. And so one of the big things that one of the systems that really addresses this idea of fixing the recipient is Breslov. Breslov is all about repairing those midot, those characteristics. And it's interesting that we have deficiencies within ourselves, and this mirrors the very aspect of the Sephirotic system, that the whole point of Chokmah is that it's not Keter, it's not Bina, and the whole point of Bina is it's not Da'at. But if you look at it from a ability to receive information, Keter is beyond anything. Chokmah is way beyond Bina. Bina is way beyond. So you can say that Bina is deficient to Chokmah, or wisdom and understanding. But the other thing is this idea of humility. So there is an order and a structure. And so by necessity for the receiver to, now going back to the student and pupil, you may not be able to transmit the entire idea of quantum physics to a 5-year-old, but give him time to mature, to learn basic math, to learn basic science, to go through physics, to all these things. And when he comes to a point where he's readied himself through these various stages of progression, now it's the same vessel, but it's been changed dramatically through knowledge and understanding. And now the 25-year-old taking the advanced physics classes can understand. And now for the first time, the transmitter is able to give over the information that it desired to give over all along. So that's the idea of Breslov and in our ability to repair ourselves and to grow and to learn and to expand our consciousness and understanding and build upon, idea upon precept and concept. And so when it comes to Ratzon, that's the side note that I really wanted to make, that it's just not the will of the person wanting to transmit, it's also the condition of the recipient that is going to receive. So, see if I can go on here. I'm trying to see where I left off here. Okay, so we must emphasize, I'm right here, that all our discussions centered around the limited Ratzon alone. We can no way grasp or understand the simple Ratzon, meaning God's infinite capacity to do. Furthermore, we are forbidden to investigate or probe into this topic about which is said, do not inquire into that which is too wonderful for you. The Holy Zohar calls the simple Ratzon the Rava de Kol Ravin, the Ratzon of Ratzonot, the source and the root from which all Ratzonot or wills will be revealed in their smallest details. The simple Ratzon, the Ein Sof, is the root of all that has come into the being in the past, that exists now, and that will come into existence in the future. In brief, the Ein Sof encompasses within itself all of reality. To help clarify this, let's use the analogy. When we speak of infinity in mathematics, refer to a number which no other number exceeds. Kabbalah sees more in this concept. Infinity is a number next to which all other numbers are negligible, just as 0 is worthless compared to any other number. Even infinity -1 is negligible alongside the figure infinity, just as 0 is valueless as compared to all other numbers. Thus, all numbers are negligible in comparison to infinity. All reality is null and void compared to the simple Ratzon of the Ein Sof. In light of the above, we can explain a verse in Psalm 113:5, who is like the Lord our God, who dwells on high, who humbles himself to see the heavens and the earth. The Creator's greatness and the might lie in the fact that he is so high and lofty, so that in comparison, the heavens and the earth are null and void. This is the answer for those who claim that the Creator of the universe pays attention, as it were, only to the higher creations and does not bother with personal providence or over lower creations such as man. This claim is nonsense, for in comparison with the Creator's greatness, i.e. compared to the Ein Sof, small and great are both as nothing. On the contrary, the Creator's greatness expresses itself in the fact that he watches over all equally, and this is the idea of divine providence. This is the meaning of the praise of God on the holy days that describe him as he who makes great and makes equal, and he who makes great and small equal. I think I'm missing a lot of things in the chat. Any questions? I know I've been. Let's see here.
The chat box.
Yeah, did I miss any questions so far? I'm sorry. I can't have the chat box open when I'm reading because it kind of obscures that.
Earlier it was asked, I don't understand if the universe was perfect, we wouldn't have purpose. He's omnipotent, always capable of going up. That was.
Oh, so like, is man capable of, what was that again?
Whoever wrote that, type it in again. Or different.
Well, this is the question. If that the Ramchal asks, and I can't remember the book. Yes, well, if in the world to come, evil does not exist, like the Gevurah and all of that side they serve the purpose and there's rectification. So what do we receive in the world to come? If it's a place of perfect unity and oneness, then what exactly is it? Do we retain our identity? Do we retain aspects of our own unique self? What are we enjoying, and what is our existence in the world to come? If having a revelation of God's oneness and these ideas can overwhelm and nullify our very existence, then how can we exist in the world to come? And one of the answers is that, and that it comes from the Talmud, is that in the world to come, that the righteous receive canopies, and that means that, like a sukkah, like you're given this dwelling, and that you can, from this perspective, that they retain an aspect of your true self and your existence, your yesh, your otherness that God endowed you with, and that it becomes like an integrated aspect of yourself, and that in the world to come you get to explore these infinite aspects. Because if we're still in a finite existence, which we are, because we're not God when we go to the world to come, then we are able to explore some of these infinite, we still have a perspective of finitude to explore finite ideas from. And so we get to experience ideas of good and love and oneness in ways that we couldn't possibly endure in this world. You two can't have your mics on at the same time. So, I mean, there is in some respect an endless levels of existence that we can't even imagine in the world to come, even as finite beings. And this comes from, I know that this is it's hard to find some of these specific teachings, but Rabbi Mendel Kessin talks about this idea in some of the later, his later shiurim on Derek Hashem. He talks about that idea. Oh, Julian. Yeah, I'm sorry. You have your hand raised. Go ahead.
So directly related to all of that, I don't know, my voice. Yeah. Is this idea that Rabbi Yitzhak Ginsburg taught when he was visiting Pittsburgh, which was, if you look mathematically at what infinity means, like on a plane or really a multi-dimensional matrix, it goes off in every direction, in every way, inconceivably without boundary, right? But then if you look at the concept of a ray, a geometrical ray, it has a starting point, but it goes on forever. It's a lesser infinity mathematically. And all of creation is this projection of the Ein Sof into this space, this matrix where it goes on forever, but it'll never equal the original infinity because it has a starting point. I just figured I'd share that because it was directly relevant to me.
That is awesome. Thank you. That's really beautiful. That's kind of like a very simple explanation of what Rabbi Kessin talks about in the Olam Haba. Like, we have a starting point, but there's no end. That's right. Thank you so much. It was beautiful. He also talks about the converse of that. If you think about punishment, when you talk about reward, when you talk about punishment, the idea of like being punished an infinite amount of time is just, there's nothing a created finite being could do that would merit that kind of treatment. So using the converse of like being able to explore God's infinite goodness, like Julian points out from this tangent of where we are to the world to come, that this idea of having an end to existence, or an end to punishment, which is very clear that punishment, Gevura, these limiting factors of God's expression in creation come to an end in the world to come. I think it's beautiful. Not existing is a permanent punishment. Now, we're going to get into some of those ideas. It's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're doing, and one of the things I hope to address in the room that I'm doing. So I'm going to continue on a bit here, and I'm sorry, my reading skills have gone down a bit, but going back to, so talking about the distinctions between the divine and human ratzon. So we can distinguish between divine and human ratzon, or will, from several perspectives. Firstly, human ratzon always arises in connection with a specific goal, and this goal limits the ratzon. Divine will, on the other hand, is limitless. Furthermore, human will is one stage among others in the process from potential to actual. Taking action is the final and most important stage in the whole process. It is not enough for human beings to will. This accomplishes nothing. And this is how we are obviously different. This accomplishes nothing. Action brings things into being. This realized potential, the actual, is preferable to the merely potential. This is not the case in reference to divine Ratzon. Divine Ratzon is reality itself. And when divine Ratzon awakens to do something, the object comes into being immediately with the Ratzon itself. Potential and actual are as one in divine will or divine Ratzon. It is very difficult to grasp these ideas, for we are accustomed to the concept that desire is abstract and matter of the mind. And how can something be done without action? Indeed, King David commented on this in the verse. He spoke it and it existed. He commanded it and it stood. So too, we find the words of our sages of blessed memory in Per Cavo, or Ethics of the Father. The world was created with 10 utterances, meaning by speech alone. Here we go. So we will try to explain this concept. When a master commands a devoted servant to move an object from one place to another, there's a noticeable interval between the command and the performance, between the desire of the master and the action of the servant. And this goes back to the idea of the analogy of the teacher trying to transmit their will to the student. There's a gap. There's something that has to be overcome. However, when the master wants to move the object himself, there's no such break. Rather, as soon as the thought arises in his brain, his hand moves and acts. Similarly, when someone wishes to say something simultaneously with the desire to speak, appropriate organs move into the action and he speaks. This is because man has within him both will and the organs of action that become a unified reality, unlike the separation that exists between the thought of the master and the action of the servant. So when you go from a transmitter, so when you go from the source itself, they're one and the same. There's this oneness that exists. We generally don't think of something and it instantaneously comes into being, and that's because we have a gap. We have a gap between our physical body and our soul, or nefesh, and in a broader sense, there's a division between the divine, the source of all the life of the worlds, and the ultimate desired object of transmission, which is us. So there's always going to be this limiting factor. There's always going to be a funneling of knowledge, of information, of energies by necessity. It's just the way that the interface works. Because we are in Yesh, because there's the I, we have God is an otherness and we're in an otherness. That is a bridge. There's a gap. There's a gulf between us. There has to be some kind of a mechanism to bridge that gap. And so, when the teacher wishes to convey a concept, there's multiple ways that you can do that. You use the interface of speech, you use the interface of diagrams, pictures, and written word. So there, you overcome the otherness of the student and the otherness of the teacher through these various mechanisms. And that's why our world exists as it does. There's an interface, there's a structure, and there's an order to the world in which we exist. And that exists because we can't take the energy directly from God. It would overwhelm us and destroy us. And we can't comprehend the spiritual infinite aspect of God either. So therefore we have to have a mechanism to go back to God. So this is the point and the purpose of the structure in the first place. Oh, is it my audio? Is it? Okay. I don't know why it's doing. I do need a new laptop. So getting into this idea of the interface, the Reb Rashab, he's Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Schneerson. He's the 5th rabbi of Chabad, and he was a prolific writer. He was ill and he was kind of trapped in a home, so he sat and used that time to write massive amounts of information. And so the next thing I want to share is from his writings. Let me see here. Stop share here. Sorry, I saw Julian's picture. It's pretty amazing. Good job. Let's see if I can find. Okay, this is page 1. And sorry, it's not the best picture. So one of the interesting things is that using the fire in this analogy, it's very common to utilize the fire analogy for the spiritual essence of God or the spiritual essence of man. So he's talking about divine desire and our own desire and how it's mirrored. So before we get into this, is a little idea I wanted to talk about is if we're made, B'Tselem Elohim, we're made in the image of Elohim, of our God. So therefore we reflect back to God those attributes that he's put within us. So we have within ourselves those 10 attributes that God has. And so one of the things we have is this will as well. And this will can be utilized and diverted to physical pleasures or spiritual pursuits. It can be either way. And so, excuse me. So this idea here, so I wanted to give a little bit of context to the next page. So starting here, the yearning of the soul. So this is the Reb Rashab's book. It's a shirim called Divine Speech. And that's what the ability to make speech, I think, is Targum Onkelos talks about that. That's what man became one of man's divine attributes is the ability to speak. Okay, so consider earthly man, for example, whose soul's nature is likewise to soar upward. As a verse referring to the soul's love of God states, her coals are coals of fire, the flame of God. Just as the flame constantly soars upward, so too is the soul. So too, the soul is constantly in a state of upward striving. This is opposite to the body's nature, which drags downward and is in a state of descent below. As in the verse, the spirit of man ascends upward, while the spirit of the animal descends downward. I think there might be a question. This book is, I'll put a picture of it. It's a Hasidic heritage series, and it's 3 of the shirim, 3 of the ma'amar, the 3 of the lessons that it's Divine Speech, Forces of Creation and the Power of Return by Shalom Dovber Schneerson. And so when we're going to this idea of opposites, we have the structure and order of the world to know God. We have within ourselves that mirror. We have a physical body, and we have a godly soul. We have this godly soul. We have a spiritual aspect, and we have a physical aspect. And so the Reb Rashab is saying here is that our spiritual aspect has a desire, has a yearning, has a compulsion and a need to go back to the source, that it's constantly being drawn upward. And the physical body, after the getting kicked out of Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden, now we have this physicality that kind of diminishes the capacity of the soul to shine. It buries it, it hides it, it obscures the physical world, obscures the godliness of creation, it obscures the godly light, it obscures the spiritual reality. And so you have almost, in the way that it's described in Kabbalistic terms, is you have this force, you have like the breath in and the breath out. So you have like contraction and expansion, revelation and concealment. And so it's this constant draw of the soul wanting to go back to a godly source, to connect to its creator and its true existence, but constantly being drawn down in a physicality. So the soul might want to study and learn all night, but you got to get up, you got to work, you got to pay the bills. So there's this constant draw between spirituality and physicality, between our Yetzer Hara and our Yetzer Tov. And so this is a force that we see within creation itself, that without the physical body, the soul would have no expression in this world and wouldn't be able to fulfill its function. And the same is true without the structure of God of creation, without the Sephirotic structure and the various structures that exist within creation for us to interface with God, we would have no ability to connect. But it's this very structure, it's this very mechanism that creates our otherness, that gives us existence, that allows us to know God, that also blocks our ability to understand God. Just like the teacher that, God, we know that God's true essence and his true desire is only for good in creation, but like the Ramchal says, you can't do that. You have to have this buffer, you have to have this interface. And the very fact that we can't handle God's true essence, his true good, that this force of Gevurah, this restricting force, this force that can come down as punishment and reward, it ultimately, while it gives us our existence and creates our reality so that we can know God, it can become the force that obscures our ability to understand God and to cleave to God at the end. So it's like Exactly like the Rabbi Nachman says, he calls it the Baki, this the person who's constantly growing, running and returning. And the Siddur talks about this too in regards to daily prayers. You go from low, you kind of ascend, you kind of touch this godliness, and then you bring it back down because you can't always exist at that elevated state. Like you can't, you may want to study 24/7 Torah, but you can't because you have to go to bed and you have to get up in the morning and go to your job. So going on to the next page here, I'm going to have to stop share because this one is not as friendly. And see if I can find it here. Okay, and I have a dog that's losing his little doggy mind in the background here. Page 2, there we go. And I think I have it here. So this is the page to share here. So he's saying, and I'll go back and reread the other page again because I've been talking a lot. Right. So again, I'm going to read going up to this and I'll read to here again. So consider earthly man, for example, whose soul nature is likewise a soar upward, as the verse referring to the soul's love of God states, or coals of fire, the flame of God. Just as the flame constantly soars upward, so too the soul is constantly in a state of upward striving. This opposite to the body's nature, which drags downward and is a state of descent below, as in the verse, the spirit of man ascends upward, while the spirit of the animal descends downward. For the spirit of man, referring to man's godly soul, which is called man, is in a state of ascent, while the spirit of the animal, the body, and the animal soul is a state of descent. This is where we're getting into. Nevertheless, the soul descends and draws itself forth to give life to the body. Now the soul is compelled to descend, contrary to its nature, as in the saying, against your will you are alive. For the soul lives inside the body against its will, contrary to its nature and its essential desire. And what indeed coerces it? The body. For the source and the origin of the body transcends the soul. Indeed, the soul stems from the level of godliness that permeates the world, while the source of the physical body is the infinite light, which transcends all the worlds. This idea is expressed in the verse, all that the Lord has desired, he has made. For making, physicality stems from God's desire and will, as explained so he explains that in a different discourse. So the interesting thing, when I first read this concept, I'm like, what? So the body is actually from a higher source than the soul. What does that mean? Well, the Arizal talks about what's the greater miracle? That God can transmit light, which is, or is essence, or they create nothing from something from nothing. So this idea of Ein Yesh, from nothingness to somethingness, is an absolute miracle. Sorry, a moment. And so therefore, the structure of our physical body, the structure of creation, the creation of an interface to know God, is of actually the miracle is that God's infinite essence can be constricted and concealed within a finite framework, and that we can know God. So the ultimate miracle is that from an infinite being with absolute unity can an otherness come, and an otherness now relate back to the infinite source. And so that's why the nothingness, Ein Yesh, is the miracle. From nothing came everything that we see, the structure and order of our world. And so the interesting thing is before I understood this concept, when I was reading the Ramchal, Derek Hashem, he really harps on this idea that physicality, he calls it coarse darkness, disgusting, covered. I'm sorry, the dogs are losing their minds in the background. So he talks about the physical world as this very negative thing, and it definitely is, because the Reb Rashab says very clearly that the moment the soul associates with the body, they're opposites. You have this godly light, the soul is from a spiritual source, and then you have this other aspect, the physical body, which is they're diametrically opposed, but they're both necessary. And so the Reb Rashab makes something very shocking, which I would never have thought of just by reading Derek Hashem and the Ramchal's writing, is that there's an innate holiness that exists within the physical body, and there's a power within physicality as well. It's not just a mechanism of obscuring the spiritual. It's not just the consequence and of the fall, of Adam and Eve kind of being lowered after they break Hashem's command. It actually has a very high divine source, and it has its own innate energy that so the Rebbe Rashab says, how do we know that the structure and order of our world isn't just like the absence of light, that it's not just something that it exists. It's hard to convey this idea, but the idea of Tzimtzum, this idea of concealment, it's not just the light being blocked, therefore something else exists. It has its own existence. And he says, well, we know this is true in the physical world because the body associates with the soul and the soul associates with the body. But the moment that the soul, when a person dies, there and the soul leaves the body and that association is broken, the body doesn't instantaneously just disintegrate. It doesn't go into nothingness. So therefore it has its own energy. It has its own source. And so the analogy that's used in Chassidus, especially by the Reb Rashab, is this idea of a flame. He says, well, you have two parts. You have parts of the flame, and he calls it the dark flame. So he says that it's built on, the flame is built on various levels. And just like the flame of the soul has to have a connection to a source, which is the body, therefore we know that the structure of our world and the physical body and Givor itself, everything that comes out of judgment, like which would be the priesthood, the Kohanim, the Mishkan, the Torah itself, letters, everything that limits God's presence is actually from a higher source than the energy itself. And so when you get to the idea of Ratzon and transmission, you can say that without the capacity to, you can have all the ideas and all the understanding and all the will, and knowledge, but without the capacity for that to be transmitted to something else and for the other person to have the capacity to receive it, then it's useless. It just sits there. And so the idea if you want to go to a really high and lofty Kabbalistic idea, this is the relationship between Tzimtzum, which is this space that's created and filled in by the lesser light called the Rishemu, which is beautiful. You have the basis of all the structure of the Sephirot, the letters of creation, the 72 letters of the names of God. All of these things are within the Rishemu. They're in kind of like a primordial existence, but without a way to be animated, it's just a dead body. And so part of the play, the Sephirot, they limit God's attributes. So they make distinctions between God's loving kindness and his judgment, his mercy, and his force. All of these, but these vessels are lifeless. So like the Reb Rashab says later on, they're like the body without a soul. They're inanimate. They can't go anywhere. They do nothing. They need the illuminating power of the Or Ein Sof to bring it to life. But without the structure, then the Or Ein Sof, this light of God, would overwhelm everything and completely annihilate the system. So you can see how the two are necessary. And so when it comes to our all of the things that we see in the world that can be negative, our Yetzer Hara, punishment, concealing of God's presence, they all extend from a very high and important purpose, and that is the creation of our otherness. But what is the purpose of this otherness? What is the whole point? If you create an otherness, just like God, if he had created the hollow space with the Rishemu, but it didn't have the capacity to be animated and to be transmitted, then it just sits there and it's nothing. It's like nothing was created ever. So the whole point of our existence, the whole point of our yish, of our otherness, is so that we can transmit back to God. And this is where the ultimate interface is, and I have that queued up next, is Malkut. So, and I have
There's
to
a
find
couple questions on the table before you go too far.
Yeah, before I get
One
into the
is,
next one. Okay.
Is this why Esau is so high up?
Exactly. I meant to say that. So whoever said that, thank you. Yeah, this is
And-
why. So Esau's capacity to tikkun, to repair the world, was actually higher than Jacob's. And
Also, is this why the sages say the earth came first and the heaven?
that's an interesting one. Is that the sages say the earth came first? That's something I'd have to look into. That's a good question. I don't have the answer for it. I have to shell that one and look into it. So the body has a wholeness because it was complete before the breath of Hashem. The breath was the fuel that enlivened the body, but it's still separate and distinct from the body. Yeah, they serve two very, very different, beautiful. Yeah, they serve very important but opposite functions. So in regards to in looking at the Sephirotic structure, the ultimate expression of Ratzon, of God's will, is embodied in Keter, which is the crown. And if you look at it Kabbalistically, in most diagrams, Keter isn't really part of the system. You start Chokmah, Binah, and Da. You start wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And the idea is this, like the crown of a king sits on the head. It's kind of above the system. And this is the ultimate encircling will of the Ratzon, the divine will. And in the Arizal's description, and I think it's important to convey this, but it's hard for me to convey because I kind of see it as a picture. One of the words that the Arizal uses, like a circling, and for me it's almost like the picture I get of God's Ratzon becoming a manifest koach, which would be an action, is this Ratzon becomes an encircling power, almost like the bride around the groom in a Jewish wedding. She encircles the groom 7 times. And it's almost that idea that this becomes an encircling power. And so you have 2 kinds of will. And this is what the Song of the Soul is talking about. You have this will that is outside of creation. It exists. We know it exists, but we don't really have any interaction with it because it's infinite and we can't have the capacity to relate to it. And then you have this the will that is revealed within the structure of our world. And so there's like an outside circling force, which in Kabbalistic terms is sovov, or a makif energy, like a surrounding energy. But then we can't really relate to that. The ones we relate to are the energy that's invested, God's Ratzon, as it is expressed through things that we can comprehend and we can know. And so the ultimate idea of Keter, of will, is the crown. Well, and we had this discussion and somebody brought that up. What good is a king if you don't have a kingdom or a people to rule? And that's the whole idea behind man. The analogy is when you're going to build a home, you're designing it. When you're building a structure, you're designing it for a purpose. You're not going to build like a wooden hut for 12 people. You're not going to, how you design and build and form a structure is concurrent to its use, how it's going to be used and who's going to be there. So the whole purpose of creation is mankind. Therefore, all of the design of our creation is going to form, is built for that purpose. And I'm not doing a very good job to convey that, but the idea in regards to the relationship of Keter, which is the encompassing will of God that's transmitted down to these lower levels, is ultimately only connected to one thing directly, and that is Malkut. So the king is directly connected to the kingship, and that's where the next idea of Ratzon comes into. Oh, it's beautiful. Again, please get out. I know I've been talking a lot, so anytime you want to pop on or raise your hand and ask questions, please do. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if I can find the next section I wanted to share. Let's see. Shut the windows here.
For anyone that got in late, we are recording and posted. Let you know.
Okay, I think this is what I needed to share. Okay, so this is from a book called Flames, and it's online, which is really beautiful to see. So this is a discourse by Rabbi Dov Ber, and not Shalom Dov, very different rabbi. I think he's the third rabbi of Chabad. So he wrote a book called Sha'arei Orah, which is also another book by the same name by Gikatia. It's not his book, it's a different one. And in it, in Sha'arei Orah, or Gates of Light, there's two discourses he gives. One is on Hanukkah and another one is on Purim. And this one is a quote from his, the only one that's been translated in English is the one on Hanukkah. So, let's see if I can find. I had it queued up. Here we go. The kingship of God. So as high as Keter is above the system, it's like this all-encompassing will of Hashem. You have the lowest is Malchut, which is ultimately the whole purpose of this Sephardic system, the primordial worlds down to Malchut of our world, is for Malchut. Just as it starts with the king, then it gets to the actual kingship. So he says, I'm gonna have to go, yeah, this is why I started here. So I'm going to read a little bit. I just get to cue up my thoughts in my head. So this is his idea. Say both of these themes of power and kingship are one. From Malchut, which is the lowest aspect of the 10 Sephirot of Atzilut, which is one of the four worlds, is the first source of the coming into being of all the worlds and creatures from nothingness. As in the verse, your kingship is a kingship over all the worlds. We can compare this quality with human kings. Kingship is only an external aura, spreading from the essence of the king, insofar that his reign and his power extend over his people. The aura of kingship is not considered an inner quality of his being, like the faculties of love or wisdom. Thus, the verse states, God is king. He has garbed himself with grandeur. He is robed and veiled to be a king over all the worlds, for his quality of kingship is only an external garment. Let's see here. And I'm trying to find, I had it queued up in another. So this is a very interesting statement here. So we say in Ashrei, which is prayer, to tell people, meaning the souls of his might. This might refers to the tremendous power of Tzimtzum or contraction, in order that the glory of the essence of his kingship should be expressed in worlds without limit, extending lower and lower, just as there is no limit in his exaltedness in his very essence. I have it marked in here. I thought I had it queued up, but there's one phrase that was very interesting here. And this is, see, I think it's number 6. I had gone past it. The listening gods. Here we go. So this is it. This is here. It says here. So God is one. He's only one. Means that blessed God is utterly alone. And he and his true. So there's and God's essence, he's truly one. Yet this is something that's very interesting. Because at the same time, he's called the life of the worlds, meaning the worlds of the Sephirot, or the four worlds of existence. For his quality as king spreads out through Tzimtzum to be king over the world. And this is the radiance which spreads from above to below. And this is interesting. So it's only through concealment can we know him. So if the king, if you think about the king, he looks like a normal man. If he didn't have the robes and the crown and he was walking out in the jeans and a pair of t-shirt, you wouldn't recognize him as the king. But when he veils himself, when he takes his inner essence and he puts on levush, when he puts on garments of kingship, then you can understand, you can relate to him as a king. When you see him walking around in a t-shirt, you may not recognize him, but when he's got his crown on and his robe and his scepter, then you know that he's the king. And the king can take on different aspects. When you see the king dressed in his armor, then you know, well, he's a king going to war. So it's these outer garments, these outer aspects that limit, or that are limiting, because if you're dressed as the king, then if you're the king, then you're not this and you're not that. Your role is clearly defined by those outer garments, but it actually reveals more about you. So there is an idea in our world that we can, through some of God's ratzon, through how God expresses himself, that we, in the more that God limits himself, that you can actually learn more through limitation than you can expansion. And so you may not know a lot about the artist in one painting, but if they painted 200, then you'll get an idea of them in a very deep way. So the various expressions of God within our world allow us to relate to God in different ways, so that we can, it's this greater revelation through only limiting ourselves. You know, God, when God only limits himself in the attribute of justice, we can understand and fathom God in a very profound and deep way if he hadn't done that. And, you know, through loving kindness. So in regards to the expression of God's Ratzon in this world, these limiting factors actually reveal more about the king, different aspects. So we know God is loving kindness. We know that when he takes on the form of loving kindness. We know that God is revealed through justice when he takes on the form of justice. So therefore, when these different garments, God's essence is clothed within these containers, or garments, or sephirot, whatever you want to call them, then you really can truly know God in a very profound way. So it's through the very limiting factor of God's essence being contained within these defined parameters can we know God. And so the idea is that the ultimate expression of God is that he is a transmitter, and he wants to receive back. So the ultimate expression of God's Ratzon would be contained within Malkut, which is this two-way interface. So God's desire is to relate to mankind, and the entire form of creation takes on structure, and then the energy flows through the lights, the transmission of God's energy through that structure. Then Malkut is the ultimate expression of God's Ratzon in creation. It's the ultimate interface. It's the way that God's energy, his light, his attributes can be transmitted and knowable to us, and it's the interface where we can relate and know God as well. It's the ultimate expression of God's Ratzon. So therefore, the beginning is in the end is in the beginning. So God, when he desired to create, when his mind, if you can use those words to anthropomorphize God, when he set about to make creation, his ultimate expression was going to be Malkut and mankind. And therefore, the connection between Keter and Malkut is the deepest when it comes to the idea of God's express Ratzon. How does his will and desire to create take force and come into existence? And that's Malkut. Malkut is ultimately the interface, the transmitter of God's will into our world, and brings about our creation and our existence. And so that was, I think it's pretty late, was some of the ideas that I have. I don't know if anybody else wanted to talk. Oh, that I have time to translate the Purim one. I'd love to have that. Wide page, oh, they're creating, oh, that's a really cool point, Luke. Thank you. That makes sense now. I agree. Rat said Shimon Bar Yochai says that he didn't understand why Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel were arguing. He said that they were created together. Yeah, that's some awesome insight there. I didn't know if anyone else had things that they wanted to talk about. I know it was kind of, like I said, a pretty impromptu. Oh my goodness, it's Lag BaOmer. I did have one. I was going to take a brief intermission. I had one last thought that I wanted to read in regards to will and Ratzon.
Yeah, take a break. Want to turn off your mic?
Oh yeah, so sorry. Let me do that. My apologies.
So
wow, you can hear the cat like multiple.
Apparently Asher has a lot to say tonight. So yeah, we'll be on next Thursday, and then we're playing it by ear on the 13th. We're not sure what's going on that date, but definitely next Thursday. I'm doing my little Matrix gig. If you haven't come to one of those yet, you're invited. We look through at some of these concepts as they are shown hidden behind the scenes, so to speak, of that movie. Those movies, I should say. That's next Thursday. Devkut will be on the 20th. Yeah, Asher's amazing. He's my 10th cat. Cat number 10, Malkut. He's the last that I can foresee. 10th cat of my life, not at once of my life. And he is absolutely the sweetest. He's a riot. Anyhow, we are doing, yeah, Matrix on the 6th, TBD on the 13th, because she's heading out of town, I think. And then,
I got called into work that day,
oh,
unfortunately.
work.
Yeah.
I don't know. Okay. And then the 27th, I guess that would make the next Thursday, would be the Neshot Mina. So that's the schedule for, what's that? May, summer. Oh my gosh, summer's coming. Awesome. And we are talking possibly of having a Saturday night, late Saturday nights group with some folks over on the other side of the planet, those people that live in the future over in Australia, New Zealand, over there, because their time coordinates Sunday afternoon, Saturday. They're 14 hours ahead. So if we have a room at, say, 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, that would simply mean noon to 4. Noon to 2 for 2 hours for them on Sunday. So we're talking about having another Saturday night group because we just can't have enough fun, going for it here. So yeah, we have these groups. They're all interconnected. They all are talking about different aspects of similar things. Everybody that facilitates these groups, we talk, and coordinate things a little bit. Sometimes material overlaps, interestingly. Sometimes I'll sit here like tonight and I'm listening to her talking about the world of Keter, of before existence, and how it all ties to Malkut, and I'm thinking, oh, that's exactly like something I was thinking of working on for the Matrix study. Exactly. So I'll be sitting down with her later, hopefully soon, and saying, hey, gotta talk some more about that. So it's interesting how all these things come together. The Neshot Bina group takes come here, Asher. It takes a lot of these these concepts through the Sephirot, through the Midot and Sephirot. These terms are interchangeable. You hear Sephirot, you hear Midot, you hear attributes, you hear emanations. They're all rather interchangeable. Generally, there's 10 Sephirot, which are emanations of God, that are understood in the Bible, in the Tanakh, and all that are in creation, and how these Sephirot interact with each other. Everything that happens in the Torah, in the Tanakh, actually, when the rabbis, the sages, look at things, they often view them as the stories are real, they're true, the people are real, but they represent these concepts. And so the interactions are understood in terms of these Sephirot and these, how they're described, the different people. One person represents, say, mercy, another represents Yesod, which is really like connection. And so when they get together, you have mercy coming through connection and connecting to something. So that's like almost like a code, if you will, but not the kind of code that you speculate, and not like the numbers and the letters and gematria, but a real actual code that is easy to understand. So here we go. I got more Australians in the house here. Yeah, I've been trying to do as a room with Zeus for 5 years now. So you talk to him, not me. No, he's busy. He's very busy, and he's in the worst place. Europe does not coordinate. Say the United States coordinates with Australia and even South Korea very well. We're just like 12, 14 hours apart. So our Saturday night works good on Sunday. But when you're 6 hours off, 9 p.m. Saturday is 3 a.m. for Europe. And it's like, it doesn't work. So we can never seem to find a time. It would have to be like Sunday, late morning here and evening there. And he works, so it doesn't work out. So unfortunately, that's that. So I think I'm done killing time here. I didn't say that Gematria isn't a real code. I said it's a different type of code. Gematria is the pretty grass around the garden, and the other stuff is the actual flowers in the garden. So there you go. All right, I think my other half is almost ready. I'm not sure. Give me a sign, Lord.
I think sharing my screen was a sign, but you continue talking. You.
No, another sign. Any sign. I don't know if you know that movie. What was that movie? The Steve Martin, was it? I forget. He was in the movie, and he was
Yes, Steve Martin.
and like the clock and the wall spinning and the lights are flashing and everything going on, and he looks up again and says, "Any sign at all?" I'm done.
Okay, so the closing thought is you talk about the structure of the world. What does that mean? Like, how does that? I'm kind of like, how do you bring it down in a co-op into action? And if you relate back to God, how does a physical person being relate to a spiritual source, and how do we utilize the interface and the structure of our world? There are various mechanisms that have been put into place for us to relate back to God and to fulfill our purpose and our role. So this is from the Rebbe's discourse, Rebbe Menachem Mendel Schneerson, 7th Chabad rabbi, and a memoir called Recurring Exodus. And so I'm going to read, and I have to go page by page because I'm using the photos. I don't know why. I got to find a better source. And anyway, so all this, so he's talking about why do we mention the Exodus every day? Why is it mentioned in prayers every day? And so he gives a long explanation, but this is the summary of his teaching. He says, all this can help us understand the verse, I will show you wonders as in the days you left Egypt. Why does the verse state the days you left Egypt in the plural? So Hasidic discourses explain that beginning with the 15th of Nisan, when the Jews left Egypt, we continue leaving our restrictions and our limitations each day, each person according to their individual state. In other words, we each experience personal redemption from our own limitations on a daily basis. And again, this is what we have, a otherness, we have this division and separation from God, and in the fact that we have our own will, we have an ego, we have a body, we have physicality, we have a sense of self, we have a sense of we exist, and I'm not you and you're not me, and we have an otherness that's so powerful and so strong that we can ultimately deny the existence of God completely and live like there is no God in this world. So how do you overcome the physicality? How do you overcome the structure and the system? Is to subjugate yourself and to transform yourself. And this is what this is going to go on to talk about. Now, thank you for coming, Michael, appreciate it. This means, as stated above, that we leave our restraints in all three pillars upon which the world stands. So we'll be hanging while I get the next one. I have to stop sharing. Find it. Don't think that's it. Page 56, page 58. There we go. Okay. There we are. We give charity without restraint. Charity is identified with the pillars of the acts of kindness and encompasses all of the mitzvot. We are involved in prayer without restraint. It may happen that others try to persuade us due to business-related matters, communal affairs, or other issues we do not have time to pray with a minyan or pray with a proper focus. However, we disregard these thoughts entirely and are involved in prayer without restraint with all your might. And this is the Shema with the V'ahavta kind of an idea here. We establish set times to study Torah every day, and namely on Shabbat and the holidays without restraint. Through abolishing our own limitations in the service of God, the physical limitations in the realm of holiness disappear. Subsequently, the same occurs to the limitations in the realm of the klipot, which are that coarse physicality that obscures God's holiness in the creation. And ultimately, Egypt, in the literal sense, is abolished as well, in the form of redemption of the Jewish nation as a whole through Mashiach. And so, by doing these three pillars, you're basically bringing down this supernal light into the world in an immense way, to the point where, if there's enough light and enough ore that comes into our existence, it can rectify all of creation and bring us to this Messianic age. So today's advice, he says, we can now understand why we continue to mention the Exodus from Egypt in the era of Mashiach. This is due to the amazing quality inherent in the idea of, so this is like restraining your Yetzer Hara. It's not like transforming it, it's like suppressing it. Even when we are beset by, I think stop sharing. I'll do the last page. Page 60. Okay, the tab. Sorry, it's a little clunky way to do it. There we go. Okay. By darkness of the world's limitations and restrictions, we achieve a powerful victory and leave those very limitations. In Torah study, prayer, and acts of kindness, God derives unique pleasure from the accomplishment, the likes of which does not exist when you transform it. So if you're able to suppress the powerful urge and utilize it and for something good, I envision this. I don't know if anybody's ever seen an oxen. They're ginormous. Like they're like 2,000 pounds. They could kill a man in a heartbeat. But when I was a kid, we used to go to the Minnesota State Fair, and they would have these giant oxen who could like rip apart an entire structure if they chose. But they're just, they have a tiny little chain to a post, and they're under control. And a man can take a set of oxen and he can get them to do his will. And this is the idea. You can transform them into something else, or you can take that energy and you can use it to accomplish more than you could ever have before. And that's the whole purpose of your Yetzer Hara. So for this reason, the exodus from Egypt is mentioned and carries weight each day. Furthermore, it will be mentioned even in the era of Mashiach, even when we invoke the greatness of achievements in exile, as explained in various texts. Though through our efforts in suppressing the forces of evil, we reveal the glory of God in all the worlds. We especially reveal God's glory in the material world, the place where we study Torah and perform the mitzvot, fulfilling the will of God through servicing him with all our heart, with all our soul, and with all our might. This hastens the time when God will put an end to darkness, so that this era will arrive immediately. With the true and complete redemption through our righteous Mashiach, we will then see our physical eyes the fulfillment of the promise. I will show you the wonders as in the days that you left Egypt. So the idea is that this physical structure is not meant to be our enemy. It's not meant to harm us, but it can. It can obscure God's presence. It can harm us. It can do immense damage to ourselves. We can use our otherness to harm ourselves, to harm others. We can use our will and extend our energy to cause great harm. But if that, in this call of Homer, this idea, if that is true, then how much more so, because God is good and God's only desire in making this world is for goodness, is his goodness to be revealed and bestowed upon man. So therefore, when we utilize the structures that God put in place properly, we can do immense amount of repair. And the Reb Rashab talks about this idea is that the energy that you expend to is almost like when you expend energy to do a mitzvah, you get it's exponential amount of energy that comes down to greet you back, comes back down to you into the system. So like you put in $1 and you get like $1,000 back. It's that kind of idea. So because God just requires it says like even if you open the window of repentance, even a tiny little sliver, Hashem will do the rest. The idea is that when you turn and utilize the structure of creation, that you are being the clock. So God has a will to create, but he created with a deficiency, and his desire and his will has not been completely fulfilled until we do our part. So through our actions, through prayer and mitzvot, through kinds of, through acts of kindness, through charity, for, fulfilling these various, by engaging in these actions in the physical world, we're utilizing the structure properly, and we're literally, it's, I can't remember the word. There's various words for it, but the idea is that you're transforming physicality into spiritual essence. You're reverting the structure of creation back to its godly source, and you're kind of like the idea that I use in my mind is that you're completing the wiring of the house so that when the power goes on, the entire thing will light up. And so that's what we do through our actions. And every bit, like when you think about when you're wiring a house, there, if you miss one part of the house, you don't connect this wire with this one, then you might not have power to a whole part of your house. This one little connection missing in this system can mean that maybe the system defaults and overloads and burns, or it doesn't light up an entire part. So when it comes to the individual in this structure, when it comes to you and I being plugged in as being conduits to bring God's Ratzon into fruition, every aspect of this is important, because if any part of it, either we have ideas of like some some people have they're great at expansive concepts. They're really good at these expansive things. Other people, they're really good at concealing concepts. They come from the side of Givor, or they come from the side of Chesed, loving kindness. And it takes all of that to bring about the ebb and the flow, and to complete the structure that's necessary for God's Shefa, for his energy to be drawn down into our world. And so again, when I first heard of this concept many years ago, like I said, this idea of you being important and you being necessary, I thought about like, is this basically like, psychobabble? And that's not. It really extends to some of the deepest and most basic teachings of Torah and Kabbalah itself. So I really appreciate everyone joining us. And again, it's open discussion. I know I've been talking, and I'm a little hyperverbal because I had some massive amounts of caffeine, but people are welcome. And Julian, thank you for sharing. That was beautiful and amazing, and really helped me think about the Olam Haba in a different light. So anybody else? I'm going to stop chatting now.
I already wrote this in the chat box, but I usually use the electrical circuit concept as the metaphor, but I really like the whole house and the wiring of the house. The completion of the entire wiring of the house actually makes a lot more sense. I really like that.
Thank you. Yeah, I stole that from Rabbi Simon Jacobson. So, yep, time to do Ma'ariv and count the Omer. So this has been, well, we can continue on. I don't know if Tovia wanted to do a little section, or anybody, Luca, Diane. I know that's like impromptu, and yeah. We get. I also could put on some of my favorite teachings too.
Yeah, we're gonna post recording, Anita, for anyone you know that might enjoy it too. It'll go on a YouTube channel, and we'll post the link in the different groups.
Okay.
Time to light an online bonfire.
No, they had oh, you're very welcome. I'm very grateful that you could join everyone and do this. Yeah, they I don't know
What
if
they do
people
tonight in the rain?
Huh?
What do they do in the rain?
We lit a fire.
Indoors.
No, not out. No, outside. It was not raining that hard. There was so I don't like ending on a sad note, but in Meron, where they have the huge Lag BaOmer celebration, they had a really tragic event happen. They had part of the stadium, the bleachers had collapsed, and it caused a stampede. So there's about 38 people, probably more, that died, and there are dozens of people that are severely injured. So it's I was like thinking about like, why did that happen on Lag BaOmer? And there's a rabbi who wrote like that there are times where, for whatever reason, this some righteous individuals and are taken in the act of a mitzvah where they're like at this highest level that they could possibly be in the moment. And it's sad and unfortunate for us, but like just I don't know if people pray, but to remember those who are injured in your prayers, because there's a lot of people that were pretty severely wounded in the whole melee, unfortunately. Not to end on a sad note, but it's something that happened today, and trying to integrate all of these data points in our world.
What a strange for Lag BaOmer though. Like the whole reason for the custom of fasting up till Lag BaOmer was the death of Rabbi Akiva's students.
Very good. He used that analogy too, like Rabbi Akiva's students were taken, so you have like these souls, because it was obviously it was a Haredi group. So, but the rabbi put a really good spin, like Julian said, it's relating it back to the students of Akiva, creating a tikkun. Yeah,
Toby, do you have anything you want to say or anyone else?
No, I can stick around a little bit though. Some people, if you need to go, in terms of anything else, anybody wanted to questions about anything at all? Literally anything at all?
Why is 42 the answer to everything?
Yeah. Well, have you read the subsequent book with the two mice, Frankie and Benji, that
Douglas K. Adams book?
yeah.
Like after Hitchhikers?
Yeah.
No, I never read.
Yeah,
anything
it's
other
like
than
the subsequent book to that, or how, I don't know how they came out, what it was. It was like, it's been so long. Anyhow, yeah, there's a subsequent text. There's these two mice that I think that do appear in the first book, right? And they're discussing what the real question is. That's an answer, but there's like a real question or something missing. And this is where it gets really, really weird, okay? Because they go through these possible options, including, I don't know, like quotations, but they settle on a song lyric from Dylan's "Blowing in the Wind." And it's like, how, you know that song, how many times must a man, and all that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, there's a reference, like, I'm trying to remember, I'm going off memory here, but it has something to do with like how many stages in life for a man. But then the rabbis say that there was 42 stages from Egypt to Israel. So there's a direct connection there.
Yeah.
And that's the actual answer, by the way. The guy took it to his grave, but that's the answer. The answer was sometimes I post the mouse icon on Facebook as my icon. I've done that in the past with a big 42. But that's they express that the question to the answer in terms of, oh, how many roads must a man walk down? I think that's it. Yeah, and that's what the rabbis say. How many roads? How many stages to the journey did the Jews have to walk down? And that's the ultimate question. And answer is 42, because that's the bride and the groom connecting, the 6 and the 7. Like mentioned earlier, the bride circles the groom times. He's the 6, she's the 7, and the unification of the bride and the groom brings us to the end of the age. And
this is also all yichud with the 42 letter name and the Ana Bakoach prayer.
Yeah. If you go up on the 13 Petals site I have, and you look under the Omer section somewhere, I've got 7 different looks at each week, a different look. And one week is the is the Ana Bakoach prayer, and one is the Oshpezin, and one is, oh, I forget. I got a different one. I get like a different weird angle on it every week. Hold right now, I actually looking through this. It was a some website that did this, like 21 different aspects to raising your child according to really empathy, really hod, you know, and so that for this week. So, but yeah, I use that in a Bachoa prayer, and yeah, when I do the Sukkot, when we do Sukkot and we go through the 7. Yeah, I got a whole I got a few, anyhow, yeah, the whole thing, yeah, that's
I actually came across 13 Petals probably a full 3 years before I ever met any of you.
well, it went up in December of 15, so that's what, 5 full years, right? 16, 17.
Well, okay, so I guess it would have only been a year.
Yeah.
So I first met you all sort of peripherally in 2016.
Yeah,
I
it sounds
was
about right.
I was a lurker in the background that chimed in
Stalker.
once in a great while. Like
Stalker Julian, we used to call you. Yeah, no.
I doubt that, because I wasn't even that active. But because I had that other group that my one friend sort of dragged me into, that I ended up accidentally inheriting somehow.
Yeah.
I archived it. I couldn't, because the guy who created it, his intention was that it would be sort of a teaching ground and a discussion ground where, like, mostly he was trying to reach out to Christians and show them like how far off they had become.